Well, hello again. It was fascinating this week. I was preparing to give our weekly exploration of consciousness talk, and I was mainly going to talk about the next things that happened with my journey to study with the Mayan shamans and the wide vistas they opened up for me. And yes, I've mentioned some already. But what happened was I happened to be on YouTube checking something out, and I saw this YouTube with Dr. Stephen Greer being interviewed, who's been big in the whole UFO community for years, studying it and trying to get out the information. And it dovetailed beautifully with what the Mayans had said to me and the shamans about our space brothers and sisters. And the quote, see it in the description below. But basically, he said something regarding the Andromeda galaxy in his opening comment. He mentions in his opening comment about Aaron Schrodinger, one of the first quantum physicists besides Max Planck, and who said the total number of minds in the universe is one. And he said that he opens his new presentation, or I guess it's not new, it's maybe a year or so old, on the close encounters of the fifth kind. And he goes into that. And what he says is basically that what he says really reflects what we've been trying to discuss, that there's a big shift taking place, that when we make that shift to who we are, you and I are, as consciousness, as awareness, it's a profound transformation, because we shift from seeing ourselves as these soul suits, these corporeal costumes, and all that goes with survival and struggle and war, because different soul suits are in groups that are fighting other soul suits, different countries, that is, and so forth. So what hit me was he said something. I used the example of somebody making contact with a sentient being in the Andromeda galaxy. And if you remember my presentation a little while ago on what some of us have had lives in other galaxies or other star systems, and my experience in Brazil with that, with these golden light beings. So his comment was something like, if we're going to make contact with these beings, we have to realize that there's really, consciousness is a singularity. Schrodinger used the word mind, but we're really talking about mind when Schrodinger talks about it as mind with a capital M, not the little mind, of which we are extensions of that big mind. So rather than use mind, I refer to it as consciousness or awareness, and the mind is like the magnifying glass that we use. We shine consciousness into our daily lives with our actions, thoughts and actions, and so on. So as I was just so struck. Now, I would make a couple of modifications to what he was saying in terms of, this is where we come to meet our space brothers and sisters, with an understanding that we are all part of the same light of consciousness. We're not separated by time and space and so forth, except in the corporeal costumes and the soul suits that we may have. But as long as we're not aware of ourselves as souls and consciousness, but are more identified with these physical forms, then, and our attitude toward the space brothers and sisters is one of, as Black Elk, the Native American elder, said, our space brother, or the Star Nation people, he called them, the Star Nation people evade us, the scientists, because the scientists have the wrong attitude. They want to shoot it down and dissect it. And beyond that, the other thing, and Dr. Greer has pointed this out, is that we are beginning to, take weapons into space. And that attitude is one where they're not likely to reveal themselves to us except to keep an eye on us so that we don't cause any problems in the wider life out there in outer space. So, as it is, the government, after 70 years of covering this up, is now admitting to having all kinds of information about these crafts that they've seen. And recently it's been in the news. It was on Fox News. It was other stations. I think CNN had some pieces on it, that the government is admitting that they have all this footage. There have been leaks from Navy ships and aircraft and so forth. They've seen these incredibly, these crafts like triangular crafts that dive into the ocean and come out again. And they have technology that we don't have. At least we're not aware of it. If there's some secrets going on in terms of investigating this kind of technology, it's being kept secret. Now, there's been a man named Bob Lazar who came out and discussed this, as well as Dr. Greer. And Bob Lazar said that there were crafts that were shot down or crashed. I'm sorry, they weren't shot down. They as far as I know, they crashed in 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico, and it was covered up and said to be weather balloons and so forth. But there's been a lot brought out about how they were actually these crafts, and that Bob Lazar was brought in to work on them to try to see if they could reverse engineer the technology. And in addition, the Colonel Philip Corso, who is now deceased, but he was talking about how our fiber optics, our stealth technology, our integrated circuit technology, our Kevlar, and the night vision goggles are all from reverse engineering technology discovered from alien craft. And so the fact that these things maneuver and that there's no exhaust system like there is with our systems, that there's some kind of anti-gravity process taking place, that these technologies are based on the understanding that we are consciousness, and as consciousness and focusing thought, these other crafts are able to be maneuvered. But the speed at which they go is not anything that we have. Of course, what's happening is that the good old military industrial complex is seeing this and saying that it's possibly from China and Russia, which you know what the answer to that is. That means more defense spending, which they can justify. And a little aside, when you really look at it, our economic structures are really based on four fundamental things. One, it got us out of coming out of World War II. I mean, coming out of the Great Depression was World War II. World War II got us out of the Great Depression. And as Eisenhower warned, beware of the military-industrial complex, but because when that got us out of war, and we have a war-based economy, a disease-based economy with big pharma, an exploiting of nature economy, not worrying about the environment as much as we should and taking care of the earth, and that's our home, but no, just exploiting it like back in the day, the strip mining and things like that, and the pollution, and exploiting third world labor. And I should say also, as part of the exploiting nature, it's remaining dependent on fossil fuels, all of which affects the environment. So that the government has leaked this, there's been speculation as to a justification for more defense spending, more money put into that whole complex. So what Greer and others are saying is that, and in the Maya is that, and in Black Elk, is that we need to realize that we're part of an interplanetary system, and that we need to become aware of that. And that I've heard this from Dr. Hugh Lin's presentations, Dr. Greer's, my own experience, the Mayan shamans, that the idea that some of us may have had other lifetimes in other star systems. Now, the arrogance of thinking that we could be the only life in this vast universe is just mind-boggling. Of course, the scientific method means I need to see it empirical. It needs to be empirically based. But there seems to be quite a bit of information that's been coming out, such that there's even some of the elements, like Bob Lazar talked about, there's a key element, I forget the name of it, that they found in these alien crafts that we don't have. It's not in the periodic chart of elements. So, there's a lot going on. So be aware that this release doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be expanding our consciousness to where we realize that's who we are. Because of the drivenness of our economy and so forth, there may be a release, and again, justification for more spending on weapons and crafts and so forth, rather than research into making contact. So that, as Dr. Greer says in the quote that begins the description below, making contact really depends on what happened for me when I had that experience in Brazil, and I felt this myself, my consciousness leave my body, go up into outer space, and then I saw a ship in which I then was catapulted onto it as I had the thought home, at least one of the homes of one of my past lives, supposedly, and being on that ship and having it pointed out to me a version of myself in that identity as this golden light being, as I described in the earlier talk. I'll refer you back to that. And this female that I saw, who had beckoned to me to show me how she and I had come together and connected. And even then, as I wrote about it, To See as God Sees, the important thing is that we don't get caught up in past lives. And I've been noticing some of the YouTubes on Brian Weiss, who I took a seminar with on past lives. And he even mentions it, Dr. Weiss, about other star systems, other galaxies, and that some of us have had life experiences on. So that we are more connected with this than we realize. The Native Americans, again, have been aware of this. The Mayans were aware of this. Their science and their math and their astronomy came from beings from the stars. And I mentioned this in an earlier YouTube too. When I was writing that piece in the book, I had written out how the Maya said that their technology, their understanding of astronomy and so forth came from this beings from the stars. And then I took in a break, I flipped on the TV, as I mentioned before, and suddenly the first line in the presentation on television was from the History Channel, and it said, the Maya, like other indigenous people, believed that have said that their technology, their astronomy, their science, math, came from beings from the stars. So it's time to really see that there's a wake-up taking place. And the way that Eckhart Tolle put it is, we're part of he said this in The Power Now, we're part of what's happening is part of a profound transformation taking place on this planet, our planet, and beyond. It doesn't say anything further than that. And beyond. It's the awakening of consciousness, the consciousness that you and I are, from the dream of identification with matter, form, and separation. That consciousness, as Dr. Greer mentions in his talk, is, in our thinking, is chopped up into all our egos, all our these forms that we're in. And yet it transcends these forms and connects us all. So this is an exciting time, and I'll be talking more about this as it comes out. But these last couple of weeks, there's been quite a bit of talk about and leaks about what the Navy and the Air Force and so forth have seen in terms of extraterrestrial crafts. And of course, they're trying to spin it that it's really Russia and it's really China So we better get caught up to speed. But there's been others that came on that debunk that basically, and if it were, we're done. Because if they have those kind of powers, game's over. So this is what we need to be focused on. That as long as we remain identified with these costumes that we're in and think that's who we really are, as Dr. Greer said, the essence of our humanness is not that we are descended from Homo sapiens, descended from monkey-apes, but that we are consciousness and that we have the capacity to be aware that we are aware, which I mentioned in if my shadow's in the lead, that means my back is to the light. So that capacity to be aware that we are aware is the meeting place for us and the beings from the stars, from these other systems. It's an exciting time. It sounds way out to us, but at the same time, the news has been bringing it out. But just be careful of the twist that they're giving it. So, have a wonderful week, and I'll be taking you more into what I also learned from the Maya.